Hey there, Leon. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Who
I'm
do I have?
Jamie.
Jamie
Yeah,
from
Jamie
England.
Hull. Yeah, spell Hull, like the city of Hull up in Yorkshire, which I've never been to, incidentally. But that's my surname.
So you're definitely English.
Definitely English.
Where do you live?
I actually live in central London.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
in sort of residence here now for about almost 3 years. But I grew up in Bedfordshire, so one of the home counties that surrounds London, which is about, if you know the London Euston station near King's Cross as well,
Yeah.
you can go from London Euston. It's about 30 miles to the sort of northwest, heading out sort of past Watford, Hemel Hempstead. So
Okay,
I
cool.
sort of grew up in that area, and I was born in Luton back in the day as well.
Are you a football fan?
Um, I mean, well, not really Luton Town, but saying that, I did used to go to a couple of matches when I was a kid. The old Hatters, and but I'm going way back. I mean, I'm sort of mid 40s now, so it was a good while ago.
Cool. Yeah, I grew up in London too. So Jamie, what's your story? Clearly, I don't know you, and I'm not sure whether you know me. If you did any research on me, but the purpose of the conversation is it's spontaneous. So tell me about yourself.
Yeah, no, it's all a bit random, and I understand the sort of model that you employ, and which I find quite fascinating, to be honest, because I've done quite a few podcasts in the recent year or so, but I've never talked to somebody that didn't have a Scooby about who he was about to talk to, which is you, and I find that quite interesting. And I did watch one of your very recent conversations with the astronaut Chris Hadfield, the Canadian former NASA astronaut, and I'm a big fan of Chris's actually, and all things sort of space, etc. And so I found that really interesting. The fact that you didn't really know him, but you cracked on, and that you had that sort of a forward momentum and engagement with the conversation. Um, so yeah, um, just to give you a little, just to sort of fill in the dots for you. I I'm certainly not as prestigious a character in terms of the experience that Chris Hadfield can boast. Sort of heading into outer space and doing spacewalks and all the rest of it. But interestingly, I can touch on a part of it was the fact that for a brief period in my life, I was an aviator, and but just didn't get to those dizzy sort of heights that certainly Chris can boast. And I flew a light aircraft in training, and I was actually working towards my goal of becoming a sort of a certified pilot. And I got so far with the training and so far with the course, and I had an incident whereupon my engine flared up at altitude. And this was in the States 15 years ago now. And I got significantly burned during that incident. So the engine flared up a height above ground, approximately 1,000 feet indicated. And I made a concerted decision, if you will, to bring the aircraft in towards the final landing phase. So following that final direct line of approach towards the active runway below, and approximately 1,000 feet, the fire breached the cockpit internally. So from the engine to the frontal breach of the cockpit, where my self only as a solo pilot was working and sat in the left-hand skipper's seat of the aircraft. So as I'm descending and I'm watching altimeter spin down, so from 1,000 through 900, 800, 700 feet, the fire was gradually building up. So it first started within the lower portion or the lower reaches of the cockpit, where my feet were working on the rudder pedals on the left and right hand side, and it was building up gradually across my lower limbs, across the front of my shins. Luckily, I had some fairly stout walking shoes on at the time, which gave me relative protection, feet and ankles. But I had let's say men's cargo shorts to the knee, like you'd wear in the summertime, with the big sort of cargo pockets. And unfortunately, my lower limbs, my shin area, was quite badly exposed to the ingress of flame. And as I'm descending, the flame is building up. And approximately 500 feet, I made a concerted decision inside the cockpit to actually veer away with my line of approach with the concrete below in the distance. And I gently veered away to my left towards a grassy embankment down below, and a grassy sort of open stretch, as it were, away from the concrete runway. So just a few degrees to my left, sort of tugging on that left-hand control stick between my knees. I'd knocked off the throttle, and I'm now gliding in. Again, I'm descending. So looking at altimeter, looking ahead, looking left, looking right, checking for hazards, checking for obstacles, heading towards the grassy stretch that I described. And I'm still descending the whole time. And as I'm descending, the fire is still building up within the small confines of the cockpit. So I got to a very low level. We're talking a couple of 100 feet above the ground. And by this stage, the fire has not just gone from where around my feet and ankles, but it's now built up to around my face, my neck. And I'm having to work, if you like, very hastily within the cockpit to do what I was about to do. And I can recall in those last moments in the cockpit, so I was literally hyperventilating in a vain bid, if you will, to protect my airway from flame ingress. So I had the corner of my mouth, I was sort of, if you will, trying to breathe and trying to protect my airway somewhat. And also had one eye shut in a bid to protect my eyesight from the flames lapping against my face. And very low level. So 100 feet, I'd unbuckled my harness, the 3-point harness, carefully. I'd actually opened the left-hand canopy door. So I now had an exit point. And I'd also ripped off my headset on my head and thrown that on the opposite footwell of the cockpit on the right-hand side, because I was a bit concerned about the flex lead cable of the headset being a hindrance. So I removed the headset, unbuckled the harness, opened the left-hand canopy door, below 100 feet, sort of looking forwards, checking left, checking right, gliding in as carefully as I could, and I'd scrubbed off as much airspeed as I dared to do so. And I'm still gliding in, keeping the nose a tad heavy. And as I'm running in, so approximately 50, 40, 30, then about 20 feet thereabouts above ground approximately, I was like Jack Rabbit, the way that I described this. I quickly clambered onto the seat, which I was sat in, then climbed over the door lip onto the left wing, and I made a giant leap, if you will, from the trailing edge of the back of the left wing to relative safety in the long Florida razor grass below. And I say razor grass because you'll probably know from, certainly in America, in the tropical locations, the grass is quite coarse, it's quite sharp. It's not like the grass here in Britain, which is quite soft and more comfortable. So it's long, sort of sharp grass there. And I remember jumping from that height, which was approximately 15 or 15 feet when I left the wing. And I was probably running in at about 30 knots, which is around about 32, 33 miles per hour. But truth is, I hit the ground like feet first, but like a sack of spuds. And it was a heavy impact. And then I sort of forward thrusted, face planted the grass ahead of me. And I had multiple facial fractures. So I had a bilateral nasal fracture from the impact. I had a supraorbital eye socket fractures above both eyes. My left index finger, which you can see here, hyperextended and fractured. My right clavicle or collarbone also fractured. I fractured a couple of ribs as well in the process. from the impact from the jump. I also ruptured my large intestine, lacerated my liver. But the worst of it was the fact that I was 6'3" or 63% total body surface area, 3rd and 4th degree burns. And that for me was a life changer and a bit of a showstopper at the time. So even though I jumped to relative safety, I'd rolled around in the long grass and smothered the flame, etc., and put the flames out on my body and indeed on the right side of my scalp here that you can see. A lot of damage was done, and I was a massive trauma. And luckily, I got helicopter airlifted from the scene within about 15 minutes because I'd put in a very hasty mayday on the radio net, if you will, during the flight on the way down, and that afforded me a relatively quick medical emergency response in Florida. And I had an ambulance on scene within probably 10 to 15 minutes. I had a helicopter about another 5 or 10 minutes later on the ground, and they subsequently airlifted me about 20, 25 minutes through Orlando airspace to probably arguably one of the world's top tier private medical facilities in the USA. So this was actually where I got really lucky. So I actually say that it was probably akin to, winning, the multi, rollover for the Euro Millions jackpot. The odds of me getting this kind of support and getting helicopter airlifted to probably the best hospital in the world was very, very fortunate. And the truth is, the doctors, the nurses, the medics, the specialists, physiotherapists, interventional radiologists, and you name it, worked tirelessly on Jamie Hull, trying to save somewhat what they could of version 1.0 to produce effectively version 2.0, which you see in front of you, which was the result of multiple skin graft operations. For 6 months, drug-induced in the States because of the gravitas of the trauma that I described to you earlier. So 6 months they put me to sleep in Florida. And that enabled them to, if you like, number one, alleviate suffering for me, and two, for them to focus all of their efforts to help me, undoubtedly to do what they did around the clock 24/7 for those 6 months. And I had multiple operations, skin grafts, human donor skin, pig skin, synthetic skin, my own skin. So where they sort of take it from areas that weren't so damaged, sort of thighs, buttocks, if you will, parts of my back that perhaps weren't so damaged. And then it's like what they call, one surgeon described it as robbing Peter to pay Paul. Take the skin from one area and from a skin graft of my own body and then place it on the more damaged areas, which were, like I said, were indeed large 3rd and 4th degree burns. And the 4th degree burn, incidentally, means that it was down to the bone. So in my shin area especially, because that bore the brunt of the greatest area and the longer period of burn, if you will, for the shin area. So it was deeper burn. Unfortunately, the doctors in America were forced to, or compelled to, excavate by way of what they call fasciotomy. So they removed a muscle group, which was what they call tibialis anterior. So that footballer's sort of shin muscle that we have at the bottom front of our lower limbs. So they pretty much had to reduce that and sort of cut it out because it was so deeply burned to the tibialis muscle. And unfortunately, I lost some deep perineal, the nerve that runs down as well between the knee and the ankle. So the upshot for me was I sustained some quite major neuropathy or nerve damage, which rendered me with a disability. And unfortunately, as a result of that, I had to hang my boots up with my career. And at the time, I was a serving operative, if you will, or certainly a very well-trained soldier with UK Special Forces as a reservist. So I worked with a unit with which what they called 21 SAS back in the day. And unfortunately, because of the gravity of the injury that I described to you and everything that was going on, and if you like, loss of muscle, loss of nerve, the reality was I had to hang my boots up with that work and that sort of career progression. It wasn't going to happen. There's no way that I was able to run with the squadron and run with my sort of fellow operators anymore. So I moved on, and I sort of reevaluated what life I would have ahead of me, and if you like, the new toolbox and the new body in this new skin, and trying to figure out what the hell it was that I was going to go on and do. And yeah, I'm pretty fortunate that I was able to make a strong recovery and sort of turn it around. So I hope that sort of fills in a little bit of background for you.
That's quite a remarkable story of survival.
It really is, certainly by my own sort of standards as well,
Or anyone's standards, for that matter.
Anyone's, yeah. I'm a really lucky chap in the fact that, number one, I got out of there on the day, that the confines of that cockpit. Number two, I was picked up by, world-class medical emergency services within that region of the USA in Florida. And if you like, number three, probably, Jamie Hull and the staunch, unwavering sort of determination to pull through. And don't ask me how the hell I did that, because I couldn't even begin to describe quite how I did it. Only that I just did it miraculously. And probably, I have to add that number four in there in terms of, I received a shed load of medical intervention and tremendous amount of support, both US side and UK side, with the interventions to, if you will, put me back together again. And all the skin graft ops, I had orthopedic operations, lots of skin graft operations, even more laser surgery more recently. And believe it or not, even 15 years on, Leon, quite perhaps extraordinary as it is to kind of get your head around it, but 15 years on, I'm still having work done, which is quite remarkable, really. It's not so bad. I mean, I've done most of the major work sort of under the knife, so to speak, but I'm still having some laser work with a laser doctor consultant here in London. So, the journey continues. But the fact of the matter is I'm pretty happy now, and most of the mainstream surgery has been completed and accomplished. And I'm in a good place again, and I'm sort of healthy and happy.
I have to ask you this question. It's a little bit, I don't know if trite is the right word, but I just have to ask it to you. So I apologize for it, but I'm going to ask you. How did this change you? I mean, I don't know what else to ask you, because, like, you're sitting here in front of me. You've clearly experienced something that is rather catastrophic, yet you're here with a smile on your face, with a determination to keep on going. And I'm just curious, how did it change you? Like, I talk for myself, like sometimes something small happens to me and I get upset, right? And I get angry or whatever. And something like this, I mean, sorry, but how did it change you? How did this change you?
No, it's a really good question, actually. And it's something that I often get asked, because, believe it or not, one of the things that I do now, I do a number of things, but I'm quite established as a motivational sort of public speaker. And I do a lot of events. I mean, it can be anything from schools to local community groups to much larger corporate companies, and I won't sort of bore you with the big sort of brand names, but I've spoken to some huge corporate audiences in the last few years. And I'm also a Health Heroes charity ambassador on a national level. So, I get sort of farmed out, if you will, by the charity, and often get to share my story with some of their sort of big sort of headline sponsor companies and so on. And I get asked that question in a roundabout way quite a lot. How did it change me? And How do you sort of perceive life now, and are you any different? And I guess yes, the answer is the short answer. But I suppose if you like to elaborate on that, I would suggest that it definitely made me appreciate what I've now got. I mean, I won't bullshit you, because for a long time I didn't appreciate, the new version of what I had, given the catastrophic nature of the accident, as you used that word and described. And it's very true. It was a devastating and it was a life-changing accident, in inverted commas. And you've all heard about life-changing accidents. And I didn't really know what the definition of such was. But the truth is, it's an accident that literally just takes you off guard and changes your whole life as you know it at the time. And therefore, you can no longer continue on that original path or track as a result of that injury or that accident or the life-changing nature of it. And therefore, you have to reevaluate, take stock, and just bloody well move on to a completely new pathway, because you haven't got a choice. That's what the life-changing accident is all about, in my humble experience. And I would probably say that before, in the previous version, that's Jamie 1.0, as I sort of use an analogy, yeah, I was this cut and thrust. I was a relative young buck. I was a sort of an elite soldier. I was doing what I was doing. I was cutting around the world, going to different sort of operational environments, be it jungle, be it mountain, be it Arctic environments, and doing what I was doing. I was just soldiering, right, as part of the UK Special Forces. And I was having a whale of a time. It's what I wanted to do. It was the ambition. It was taking me places. And I was all about challenge, adventure. And I guess in a sort of a roundabout, self-centered way, it was all about me. When I sort of look back at that and analyze the era, the time of my life. And then I had this massive life-changing accident, which I described to you. And believe me, I had a lot of time to sit and think about it. I mean, I was in the hospital. What I didn't mention to you, I was in the hospital for 2 years. 2 years. I mean, how many people can say that they lived in the hospital for 2 years as an inpatient? I never got out. So the first 6 months drug-induced in USA. Truth is, I didn't really know what was going on, because that's the whole point. I was drug-induced. But then 18 months in various further burns units in Chelmsford in Essex, in Stoke Mandeville in Aylesbury. I was even in Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, in High Wycombe, briefly in East Grinstead in Surrey. I was all over the shop, getting drafted around so I could see different consultants for this work and that work to get carried out. And I had a lot of time to sit and think about, Jamie version 2.0 and how I was going to carry that guy forwards and what the hell I was going to do, because I desperately grieved the old me. That's the truth. I grieved the old me for years. And in truth, it took me about 2 years of hospital, but it took me 3 years of healing, thereabouts, until all my physical wounds properly sort of healed and closed up, because the depth of the burns was pretty, extravagant all over. And it took a lot of work and skin grafts, et cetera, and a lot of surgeries back and forth. Anyway, 3 years I healed. But actually, it took me about 5 years up here. And that's difficult to get your head around. And so for the first 5 years, I was coming to terms with it. And I was trying to accept it. But of course, it was difficult. And of course, I was grieving. And there was probably a period within that, again, I can't sort of dismiss this, that I genuinely wanted to check out, because I didn't think that it was the new life, the new version that I wanted, right? I didn't think it was a life that I wanted, to pursue going forwards, given the 63% third degree burns, etc., and everything that I had going on with that. I just thought, what the hell is the point? There is no point. There's no future for me. There's no journey that I foresee that I want here. No, thank you very much. And I was thinking constantly back to what I had before, grieving that and thinking, I missed that dearly and I so much want to go back to the old me. And that was the problem, because I couldn't go back and it was never going to happen. The old me is gone effectively. The old athlete is gone, etc. And I couldn't be that sort of soldier guy anymore. So that said, that was partly the problem, because I constantly grieved and I constantly was thinking about the past and not making progress. And if you are in that perpetual sort of quagmire, so to speak, you can't find a way out and you can't make progress. And this is the thing. This is the key. And the one thing I learned was that in order to make progress, we as human beings have to accept the here and now. We have to accept our predicament. We have to accept the circumstance that we are facing, and in some cases that we are circumstances that we are effectively besieged by. Yeah. And what I mean by that is what's happening here and now in our lives respectively. If we truly embrace that and we accept it, whatever it might be, then we can think about a future path and how we're going to work with that current toolbox that we've got in order to move forwards. What we can't afford to do is grieve and reflect perpetually on what we've lost, no matter what those circumstances might be, because it doesn't get us anywhere. I learned that. And you've got to accept the here and now in order to move forwards. And it was about the 5-year period following large percentage third-degree burns that I probably realistically accepted the new me. That was the version 2.0, and thought, okay, well, I'm effectively disabled. I'm no longer the athlete. I'm no longer the soldier. So I can't do that work anymore. And I'm up against it. But am I? Am I up against it? What can I still do? Where can I still potentially add value in my own life? And what things am I still capable of? And once I started to address that and realize that actually there were things that I could still do, irrespective of what I'd lost, then I was truly able to make decisions about what it was that I was going to choose to do. And therefore, what I chose to do was actually, first of all, get quite active again. That was key for me. I tried to get as active as possible. And I was a keen runner beforehand. There was no way that was going to happen. So I started to now learn to walk all over again. I had to learn to walk, to feed, to write my name even, because my hand was all crippled from skin grafts on the back of my hands. And once I was learning to do these things, I started to get busier. And I started to write letters, if you like, and make applications towards things that I might be interested in. So I learned to walk, and I applied for things like a chance to join the marathon. So I did a London Marathon, and I power walked it because I couldn't run. I did the London Marathon in 8 hours and 30 minutes. Now, most people are wagging their tail if they do it in under perhaps 3.5 hours. But there was no way that ambition was going to be there for me anymore. So for me, I had to set new goals, realistic goals, remember, in the new body, in the new skin. And for me, if you like, cutting around 26.2 miles or 42 kilometers of the London Marathon route, to get around in, if you like, sub 9 hours was my big goal, was my big ambition. So I started training, and I built up to about 8 miles per day in the local area. And if you do the maths on that, without boring you, that's actually about 2,500 miles per annum. So that's what my aim to do was in year 3. And then I think by the end of my 3rd year of recovery, I was now out of the hospital, still facing surgeries, but was gearing up for the marathon. And I managed to achieve it in, as I mentioned, 8 hours 30. And then a mate of mine, who interestingly was he was an ex-British athlete. He had some contact with the New York London Marathon office, I think via London Marathon office. And basically it's not what you know, it's who you know, as you probably realize a lot in this world. So he managed to make some calls, and I think he was quite impressed the fact that I'd got round the London Marathon, the fact that I even got round. So he made some calls, and before I knew it, I was actually offered a place to go to New York and do London Marathon. It's not so much of a boast, but I set myself up for the challenge. And I thought, you know what? If I've got this opportunity ahead of me, I've got to bloody well pull my socks up metaphorically, and give it my best effort. So I actually went to New York, and if you know New York, there's the 5 boroughs. So you start on Staten Island, and then you go through across the bridge into Brooklyn, into Queens, and then you cross the bridge again into Manhattan, and then you go up north and loop round the Bronx, and then back down into Manhattan. I finished in Central Park. So anyway, I gave it best effort. It was getting dark by the time I actually finished the route. 26.2 miles, 42 kilometers, and I crossed that, if you like, the threshold, the finish point in the southern portion of Central Park in 7 hours and 7 minutes. And the reason I like to highlight that is because it's the power of what can be achieved despite life-changing injury, and despite the magnitude of the burns and the scarring and all the surgeries that I'd had, and the fact that I was subject to permanent physical disability concerning my lower limbs and nerve damage, permanent. So I had a bilateral foot drop as a result of the injury, which I described. But I was still able to power walk around that with the right determination and quite a lot of encouragement from fellow participants. A lot of very happy New Yorkers blasting out music from the streets. And I remember listening to U2, Where the Streets Have No Name, and they were blasting that out from the big speaker systems from their flats overhead. And I remember going up to the Bronx, and it's quite I think it's quite a famous area. A lot of rappers have come from the Bronx, American sort of rappers. And I remember going up there, and we went through this big tunnel, and there was a couple of black guys on microphones, and it was a classic. So one of them was on the mic, and he was like, "You can do it, you can do it, you can do it." And this other little guy with a squeaky voice is saying, "You can do it, put your back into it." And it was brilliant encouragement, and that's what I'm getting at. And so it wasn't just my own physical and mental sort of determination and resilience to get round New York Marathon in this example, but a huge amount of encouragement from the local people. I mean, even the cops were dancing on the sidewalks, listening to the music and dancing and sort of blowing their whistles. This is cops in uniform on duty in New York. So I was really inspired by all of that, the whole charade of the scene at street level in New York. And you know what? It was moments like that I reflect back on in my own recovery post burns, like large burns at that. And it was moments like that made me realize, you know what? The life is not the same, but it's bloody well worth living. Because, sometimes you can just surprise yourself, and you can actually pull it out of the bag what your ambition still might be, even though it's not going to be the same, and you might move a bit slower or whatever. But it was the social moments as well, and the memories that were created along the way from doing some of these events. I actually went on to do a third marathon in London, and I thought, right, I'm going to give it my best athletic performance in the version 2.0 that I described, the new me. And given the disability, I sort of power walked and thrashed myself around the course in London. And this time I did it in 6 hours 15. And I got to say, despite the blisters and the pain and the aching limbs, I was deeply pleased with that result, because I thought, you know what, bloody hell, even able-bodied people are going to struggle to probably do that time in 6 hours 15, sort of power walking. So I really had to sort of metaphorically give myself a pat on the back and actually, realize what it was that I'd actually accomplished and achieved. And that made me feel quite proud. And with that, it helped me to inspire myself to go forward in life and partake in much bigger challenges. So in a nutshell, I don't know how much time I've got, but in a nutshell, I went on to do Race Across America on a push bike. I cycled as part of an 8-man team with a Wounded Warrior program here in the UK, which was called Help for Heroes. And actually, we raced against the Wounded Warrior Project team of veterans in the USA. So we started in Oceanside, San Diego, just off the beach in California. And then we rode 3,100 miles across the states. So for the US listeners, perhaps, we raced across 11 states of the USA. That was 44 counties, so I'm told, and 350 individual US communities. And it was amazing. I mean, going across the deserts to the Rocky Mountains to Kansas. Oh my God, the wind in my face going across Kansas was like 50 miles an hour plus, and the crop dust, trying to sort of impede our progress was just hideous. So I can't say I'm a big fan of Kansas, but it was an amazing experience all the same, racing across America on the RAM, the Race Across America. And I did that actually 10 years ago now in 2012. And at one stage we were head-to-head racing against the US veteran team. They actually beat us, by the way, the US vets, but not by much. It was a matter of a few hours. And at the end of it, we got to meet in Washington, D.C., we got to go to a small reception and we got to meet the Senator John Kerry. So I was delighted to be able to get across the finish line and have that sort of social interaction with the US guys and meet the senator. It was a lovely moment. Yeah. Anyway, Leon, just quickly, because I don't want to sort of go on, but what I will say is I did many challenges for your listeners, and I was able to turn it around, make a really positive, active recovery. I did marathons, Race Across America. I led a lot of expeditions around the world for young people, and I ended up doing about 8 international expeditions for school leavers from Vietnam to Galapagos Islands to India to Borneo and such places. I did all these expeditions. I now, in the current day, I still do expeditions from time to time. I'm now also a PADI course director in the dive industry. So I don't know if you know much about scuba diving, but I kind of climbed the ladder within that industry and became a course director, which is the highest sort of, if you like, ranking sort of, or highest rating within the industry as an instructor trainer. And I specialize and I work with other veterans that may have very pressing and challenging disabilities. And just as an example, I recently taught a gentleman to dive in the Bahamas, in the islands there, a gentleman with a traumatic brain injury and no legs. So it's a wonderful thing that I'm able to do and something that I'm able to give back to our sort of wider community of armed forces veterans. And I'm very passionate about my personal support towards armed forces veterans, and I do what I can to support that community and to keep pushing. And aside from that, I still do a fair bit of public speaking and different audiences. And for people that might be interested in the wider, deeper narrative of and scope, if you will, of my story, I was very fortunate that recently I got picked up for publication, and I got published by Penguin. Wow. And the book is called Life on a Thread. So like the thread in your shirt or your blouse, life on a thread. And it's a very biopic sort of memoir of my sort of life experiences going way, way back. And indeed, some of the military, if you will, sort of stories and anecdotes and all the rest of it, as well as, what had happened to me, what I described, and the new life. So people may find that interesting. And indeed, it's available on audio if they want to listen. I did that myself in the studio recently.
It's a truly incredible story. And a question I have for you is, how do you inspire people to change their lives without having to have a catastrophic situation force them to change their lives?
Of course. And the truth is, I wouldn't wish it upon the enemy. I would not. So I wouldn't want a fellow human being to go through large percentage third-degree burns. It's just not pleasant in the slightest. And indeed, it just takes so long to recover from, as I mentioned earlier on. So I just generally wouldn't wish that on anybody else. But that said, so my methodology, if you will, certainly as a speaker, and I do workshops and all the rest of it, is that what I like to highlight is the power of human spirit. And that is where, if you will, I can kind of, I bring that kind of experience of and wisdom. And from my humble experience on all of this, in a nutshell, it's all about what I call the mojo. And you'll say to me, what is mojo? So really, realistically, what that means is human spirit. And so once you learn to tap into your mojo, you can truly drive it forwards, and you'll be surprised. You can nurture projects and your own personal ambitions. But it's a question of how much do you want it as an individual? And if you want something bad enough, you will categorically go out there and fight for it. But granted, you need time, you need reasoning, you need good reason. Perhaps you need encouragement from friends, family, professional colleagues, associates, etc. But by tapping into the mojo and indeed the spirit, you can certainly drive ambitions, and you can certainly get from point A to point B on this kind of graphic sort of chessboard, if you will, that we call life. And that's my humble take on the analogy of what I try to share with people, because a lot of people are looking for that, and a lot of people don't know how to tap into it. And the deeper sort of reasoning, if you will, behind this is that it doesn't just happen. So you can think it up and say, okay, this is what I want to do. But in all honesty, we can choose to do two things, if you will. We can talk the talk, and we all know people that perhaps talk the talk, but it doesn't really go beyond that. But I prefer the scope of walk the walk. So meaning that you've not only talked the talk and you've come up with these ideas and these suggestions and these, brainstorming ambitions, etc., but you've also decided to walk the walk and execute that and see it through. And that's crucially important if you want to fulfill your dreams and objectives, ambitions. So from my point of view, it's far more important not just to talk the talk, but to walk the walk. And by doing so, you're likely to certainly make a concerted effort on the right track to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in life. But also other factors are important. We all need to consider our own well-being, and that means in the physical sense, and that also means in the mental health well-being sense. And we hear about it, but we don't necessarily consider what it truly means. And my take on that, in a nutshell, without probably sharing all my sort of state secrets, is that physical well-being is quite simple. We need to stay active. The moment we stop, I believe that it's not necessarily a healthy thing for any of us. So, for example, even when older citizens are, nearing retirement and they start wagging their tail and talking about retirement and can't wait to put their feet up and all this kind of business, my take on it is that actually wouldn't be a good idea, sir or madam, because the moment we start slowing down, we're probably realistically asking for physiological problems to start creeping in. So my take is that we need to keep moving. We need to keep ourselves as active as possible. I'm not proclaiming that we all need to be sort of grade A, all-star track athletes going forwards in life, but we certainly need to maintain a level of activity. And whether that is, meeting up with buddies in the park to play tiddlywinks or chess or whatever, the fact that you can just get down to the park, great, you're being active. Or, tending to the rosebuds in the garden. Yeah, that's great because it's active and it's getting you off the sofa. And what I mean by that is just general all-round activity. It doesn't matter what you do, just do something and get off that sofa. And the other side of it, the mental health well-being. So my take is we need to do the right things to help nurture our mental health well-being. And that means, I think, predominantly living a largely clean existence, free of sort of relative toxin. And so, keep the diet relatively clean. I'm not suggesting you need to be, sort of super clean with sort of diet, etc. But, a little bit of junk food or what you fancy doesn't necessarily harm you, but don't live on it entirely. So keep your diet relatively clean. You all know about nutrients, fresh fruit, vegetables, etc., etc. I'm a firm believer in keeping the diet relatively nutritious, relatively healthy, not having too much alcohol within your diet for obvious reasons, because I think alcohol is mainly a toxin that the body struggles with. Smoking can be an issue, but perhaps in strict moderation, you can get away with it. But you need to be mindful of that. And also doing things that spark our interests here in the cognitive sense. So by keeping the grey matter, again, relatively active, whether it's reading, whether it's kind of crosswords, I don't know, whether it's, even keeping abreast of current affairs, watching the news, watching Hollywood movies, whatever it might be. But, playing computer games, it's just things that you do that spark you into maintaining a general kind of cognitive interest in life and keeping the brain engaged, I think is a very healthy thing. So it's generally speaking, it's all of the above. It's keeping physically active, it's keeping mentally active, and adopting a relatively clean approach to your diet and well-being and so on. That's my kind of, if you like, my rounded take on it. I don't necessarily profess to have all the answers, but what I will humbly add is that I was very fortunate. I was able to fight back, and I mean fight because it was a tremendous fight, from a massive life-changing trauma that I described to you earlier on, and not least 63% third-degree burns, etc. And if I can do it and make a relative success of myself, that's Jamie Hull version 2.0, then I think there's a lot of hope for a lot of people out there. And that's really, what I'm all about in sort of sharing that sentiment and hopefully giving people hope in their own lives respectively. And I hope it's been somewhat interesting.
It's been incredible. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing your heart and soul. And, I don't think I'm ever going to forget the story you said about when you were inside that plane. It's like clearly seared into your memory. And it was a very, very powerful story. And the end of this little conversation was also very powerful, kind of giving people and myself ways to become better, to become wiser, to become more grounded, to become more human, and ultimately to become connected to our spirit. Because I would go so far as to say, based on the story you just shared with us, that if you weren't, or if you didn't find a way to connect to your spirit during the opening salvo of this catastrophic event, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation. So that piece of connection to spirit is critical.
I absolutely agree, Leon. And fundamental, I would suggest, is human spirit. I mean, people talk about it, but it gets often overlooked. But everybody, can tap into their own sort of spirit. And that is very much unique. And it is, if you will, a very personal thing. Because what I'm getting at is what makes you tick doesn't necessarily make me tick. And you need to find your own interests. You need to take perhaps Leon time out to try to find what it is that you enjoy and what it is that how you truly enjoy spending your personal time, if you had all the time in the world, so to speak. And so by tapping into your own interests and nurturing that, you can really help to connect, as you say, with your own personal human spirit. We all can, respectively, because again, we're all, if you will, very, in fact, sort of DNA derived individuals. And so what works for you is different to what works for me. And that is my sort of humble take on it all. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. fundamentally, I massively had to realize that it was all about acceptance for me, refinding my mojo, and if you like, embracing the new me, if you will, and nurturing the process for my future and my new life, if you will, and what it was that I was going to go on and do. It wasn't necessarily easy in the early years. I'm not saying it was an easy thing to pick up on, but with all of the above that we've described, so the physiological, the mental health, well-being, tapping into your human spirit, perhaps in addition, trying to adopt a good sort of pretty solid routine with sleep pattern, etc. We can hopefully, all of us, be the best version of ourselves going forwards, and we can get hopefully the most out of life, because let's face it, we need to do that. We want to do that. We hope to do that, all of us, because any right-minded, sane, somewhat intelligent human being wants to get the best out of this relatively short life that we're living. Because believe me, my friend, no dress rehearsal. I know that better than most because I spent 2 years in the damn hospital, and I've been under general anesthetic 63 times, where they've had to sort of put me out in order to sort of repair the damage in the past. So I absolutely, categorically, am just one example here of a human being with my own individual story. But I realize more than most that life is short. It's a good life. It's worth living. But we need to hold on, and we need to properly nurture that to get the very best out of the time that we've got available. And then I think we can all take stock, and we can all actually hopefully enjoy what we've got, and then reflect and look back and say, yeah, we did our best. We became the best version of ourselves, and we tried, at least. We did our best.
Jamie, thank you for your profound story of hope, truthfully. And I will not forget it. And it was beautiful that you shared it, and I thank you deeply.
No problem, Leon. Absolute pleasure talking to you, and nice to meet you as well.
Good to meet you too.
Hello everyone, it's Leon here, aka The Kindness Guy. If you like my videos, which I hope you do, don't forget to press the subscribe button, and also to ring the little bell so that the notifications notify you that I have a new video out in the world.